In 1964, a 6'5" giant stood on a London soundstage, shaking. 48 consecutive blown takes, sweat pouring down his face, Stanley Kubrick's crew dead silent. This was Sterling Hayden, the man Paramount had once called the most beautiful man in movies, and he was falling apart. What if I told you this man had been a ship captain at 22, that he'd run guns to Yugoslav partisans under a fake name and earned the Silver Star for combat bravery, that a congressional committee broke him so completely he spent the rest of his life calling himself a rat? What if I told you he kidnapped his own children, sailed them to Tahiti in defiance of a court order, and told reporters, "An ounce of freedom is worth a ton of gold"? What if I told you the man who played the most famous anti-communist lunatic in movie history had actually been a member of the Communist Party, and that Kubrick knew it when he cast him? His name was Sterling Hayden, and the story of his life makes every character he ever played look tame. Here are 10 moments that reveal the real Sterling Hayden. His story starts in a place you'd never expect. Number 1, the 16-year-old dropout who went to sea for $10 a month. His name wasn't Sterling Hayden. It wasn't even close. He was born Sterling Relia Walter on March 26, 1916, in Upper Montclair, New Jersey. His father, George Woodruff Walter, sold newspaper advertising. His mother, Frances Simonson. Walter played piano. They were a comfortable middle-class family. Summers in the Catskills, a stable home, a predictable American life. Then, in 1925, George died after a long illness. Sterling was 9 years old. His entire world collapsed. 4 years later, his mother married a businessman named James Watson Hayden. Sterling took his stepfather's surname. But James Hayden was a dreamer, chasing business opportunities that never materialized, staying in fancy hotels while the money disappeared. The family bounced from New Hampshire to Massachusetts, to Pennsylvania, to Washington, D.C., to Maine. Sterling never had a stable home again, but he found something better than a home. He found the sea. Enrolled at Wasukig School, a preparatory academy in Dexter, Maine, he lasted until early 1933. Then, the 16-year-old dropout walked into a ship chandler's shop, learned that the schooner Puritan was hiring crew for a voyage from New London, Connecticut, to San Pedro, California, and signed on as ship's boy. His salary was $10 a month. He never went back to school. Over the next 5 years, he built a seafaring resume that would have been extraordinary in the 19th century, let alone the 20th. He worked as a doryman on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, hauling cod in freezing Atlantic spray. He made 11 trips to Cuba as a fireman aboard a coastal steamer. He skippered a trading schooner in the Caribbean. And by 1936, at the age of 20, he shipped as first mate aboard Irving Johnson's legendary brigantine Yankee on a circumnavigation of the globe. By 1938, he was navigator on the schooner Gertrude L. Yenthabad under Captain Ben Pine in the Fisherman's Cup, races against the Canadian schooner Blue Nose, the last great race between North Atlantic fishing schooners. During the third race, in driving wind and near zero visibility, it was 22-year-old Sterling Hayden who found the windward mark and led Thabad to victory. That November, he received his first command, the brigantine Florence C. Robinson, sailing 7,700 miles from Gloucester, Massachusetts to Tahiti with a crew of 11. Most of them barely knew how to sail. A ship captain before he was old enough to vote in every state, and he would have been perfectly happy to remain one for the rest of his life. But number 2, Sterling Hayden becomes the most beautiful man in movies and immediately wants out. The intense press coverage of the 1938 Fisherman's Race had made Hayden a minor celebrity. The Boston Post ran his photograph with the caption, "The bod sailor-like movie idol." Women who came to view the racing vessels kept asking who this towering blonde giant was. After a failed attempt to buy a schooner and start a packet service, which ended with a storm off Cape Hatteras that nearly killed him, Hayden washed up in New York City flat broke. His sun-bleached blonde hair, his muscular 220-pound frame, and his commanding 6'5" height made him impossible to ignore. He drifted into modeling. An Associated Press newsman convinced him to try Hollywood. Paramount arranged a screen test with Jean Cagney, James Cagney's sister. Hayden was, by his own admission, completely lost, ignorant, and nervous. Producer-director Edward H. Griffith signed him anyway. In May 1940, Hayden landed a 7-year Paramount contract starting at $250 per week. He later said he had only one plan in mind: get $5,000, buy a schooner, and disappear. Paramount's publicity machine had other ideas. They christened him the most beautiful man in movies and the beautiful blonde Viking god. His first film, Virginia, in 1941, paired him with Madeleine Carroll and Fred MacMurray. His second, Bahama Passage, reunited him with Carroll in The Turks and Caicos. Carroll, the English star of Hitchcock's The 39 Steps, and at one point the highest-paid actress in the world, had casting approval over her co-stars. If she hadn't accepted Hayden, his film career would have ended before it started. Instead, they fell in love. They married on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1942, in Peterborough, New Hampshire. Carroll was 35, Hayden was 25. But by December 1941, he had already announced what would become his lifelong refrain, quote, "I'm no actor, I'm a sailor," end quote. He walked out on his Paramount contract. He would not make another film for 6 years. Number 3, Sterling Hayden becomes a commando, changes his name, and earns the Silver Star. Even before Pearl Harbor, in November 1941, Hayden had contacted Colonel William Wild Bill Donovan, head of the Office of the Coordinator of Information. He was shipped to Britain for commando training with the Argyll and Sutherland Highland Regiment in Scotland, the only American and only military novice in a group of hardened combat veterans. In March 1942, his final qualifying parachute jump went wrong. He landed in a quarry and broke his ankle, tore cartilage in his knee, and injured his spine. That would have stopped most men. It didn't stop Hayden. On October 26, 1942, he walked into a Marine Corps recruiting station in New York City. Despite being flagged as too tall on his medical exam, he was sent to Parris Island, where his drill instructor called him a hell of a good Marine. He was commissioned second lieutenant at Quantico in April 1943, finishing 26th in his class. He immediately transferred to the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, and legally changed his name to John Hamilton to operate undercover. The OSS sent him to Bari and Monopoli on Italy's southeastern coast, where he took command of a clandestine fleet, 14 schooners, 2 brigantines, and 6 ketches, crewed by roughly 400 male and female Yugoslav partisans. His mission was running weapons and supplies across the Adriatic to Marshal Tito's guerrilla forces. Think about that. A 27-year-old former movie star commanding a secret fleet of armed sailing vessels in the middle of a world war. On Christmas night, 1943, Hamilton landed on the Yugoslav island of Korčula during a German attack. Reconnoitering by jeep with partisan officers, they drove straight into a German ambush. His driver was killed. Hamilton shot his way out, then spent days island hopping through Hvar, Brach, and Vis, dodging German E-boats at night and Messerschmitt fighters by day. On Hvar, under constant Stuka dive bomber attacks, he conducted a 6-hour outdoor intelligence conference with partisan officers in the open. He crossed back to Italy on New Year's Eve through a severe winter storm and German naval patrols. This action, December 24, 1943 through January 2, 1944, earned him the Silver Star for, quote, "great courage in making hazardous sea voyages in enemy-infested waters," end quote. In the summer of 1944, he parachuted into fascist Croatia. He arranged the rescue of 26 American airmen, including 11 nurses forced down in German-held Albania. His OSS evaluation noted his, quote, "reckless disregard of his own life," end quote. He captured a German E-boat. He was promoted to captain. He was awarded the Yugoslav Order of Merit, personally by Tito. He was discharged on Christmas Eve 1945, exactly 2 years after his Silver Star action began. He wrote to a friend during the war, "I know now that my entire life before this was one endless search for pleasure." Well, maybe it isn't too late to make up for the wasted years. Number 4, Sterling Hayden joins the Communist Party. For 6 months, His wartime admiration for Tito's partisans planted a seed that would nearly destroy him. In June 1946, Hayden joined the American Communist Party. He quit in December 1946, a membership lasting barely 7 months. He'd been enraptured by the courage and sacrifice of the Yugoslav fighters. He couldn't separate their heroism from their ideology. B. Winters. Yet his former mistress and his agent's secretary recruited him. Former sea captain Warwick Tompkins Sr., who had known Hayden since he was 14, had been feeding him communist literature for years. Hayden was never a disciplined Marxist. He attended cell meetings. He supported a painters' union drive. He drank at parties. He later wrote, with scorching honesty, "What did I care for labor? For racial discrimination? For civil liberties and the war between the classes? Oh, I cared in my own fashion. I cared just enough to embrace these things as props." He left the party declaring, "I'd rather be wrong on my own than be right on somebody else's say-so." 7 months. That's all it took to destroy the next 35 years of his life. Number 5. Sterling Hayden. Names names before HUAC and never forgives himself. On April 10th, 1951, Hayden appeared before the House Un-American Activities Committee as its lead-off witness in reopened hearings on communism in Hollywood. Entertainment lawyer Martin Gang, the best clearance lawyer in the business, had brokered the deal. The FBI had been blunt. If Hayden became an unfriendly witness, he could forget the custody of his children. His own psychiatrist, Dr. Ernest Philip Cohen, was secretly funneling patients toward cooperation with the FBI. Hayden was cornered. He named names: B. Winters, Robert Lees, Karen Morley, Abraham Lincoln Polanski, Maurice Murphy, Warwick Tompkins Sr. The consequences for those people were devastating. Polanski was blacklisted for 17 years, not directing another credited film until 1969. Karen Morley was forced out of the film industry entirely. The Robert Lees suffered severe career destruction. Hayden? He was praised. Ronald Reagan called his testimony honest and frank. 2,000 press clippings arrived, most with nothing but praise. He was cleared. He continued working. He never forgave himself, not for a single day. His autobiography, Wanderer, contains some of the most anguished passages of self-condemnation in American letters. He wrote, "Not often does a man find himself eulogized for having behaved in a manner that he himself despises. He called himself a real daddy longlegs of a worm when it came to crawling. He told interviewers, 'It's the only thing in my life that I'm genuinely ashamed of. It still haunts me. Because I was a rat. I was weak. I have no excuse.' To his psychiatrist, he spat, 'If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have turned into a stoolie for Jay.'" E. Edgar Hoover. Victor Navasky, in his definitive study Naming Names, wrote that Hayden ended up as a hero to the public, but a coward to himself. That contradiction ate him alive for the remaining 35 years of his life. Number 6. John Huston sees what nobody else can. The Asphalt Jungle. Out of 35 pictures he made, Hayden publicly declared that 30 were ridiculous, but the other 5 include some of the finest performances in the history of American cinema. The Asphalt Jungle in 1950 was the breakthrough. Director John Huston had met Hayden in Washington during a protest and told him, "I've admired you for a long time, Sterling. They don't know what to make of a guy like you in this business." That Huston pitched the role of Dix Handley, a small-time hoodlum dreaming of his lost Kentucky horse farm, by saying Dix is you and me and every other man who can't fit into the groove. MGM Chief Dorr Sherry objected to casting Hayden. Huston fought for him. During the climactic scene where Dix breaks down in tears, Huston told him afterward, "The next time somebody says you can't act, tell them to call Huston." The film earned 4 Oscar nominations. MGM boss Louis B. Mayer hated it and called it trash. It's now in the National Film Registry. A young Marilyn Monroe had one of her first significant screen roles alongside Hayden. Number 7. Joan Crawford, Stanley Kubrick, and the role that made Sterling Hayden immortal. Johnny Guitar in 1954 paired Hayden with Joan Crawford under director Nicholas Ray and became one of Hollywood's most legendary on-set disasters. Crawford, enraged when the cast applauded co-star Mercedes McCambridge's first scene, raided McCambridge's dressing room, and scattered her costumes along the highway, Hayden's verdict was absolute. There's not enough money in Hollywood to lure me into making another picture with Crawford. And I like money. Initially panned in America, the film was immediately embraced by the French du cinéma critics. Truffaut called it the beauty and the beast of the Western. It is now recognized as both a masterpiece and a McCarthy-era allegory. Then came The Killing in 1956. Hayden accepted $40,000 to play methodical heist planner Johnny Clay, lending his name to help a 27-year-old director named Stanley Kubrick secure financing. The total budget was roughly $320,000. Kubrick's innovative non-linear structure, showing the same racetrack robbery from multiple perspectives, was revolutionary. It directly inspired Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs decades later. The film flopped commercially, but it announced Kubrick as a major talent, and it set up the partnership that would produce Sterling Hayden's greatest moment on screen, Dr. Strangelove, in 1964. Kubrick coaxed Hayden out of semi-retirement to play Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper, the paranoid air base commander who launches a nuclear strike because communists are contaminating Americans' precious bodily fluids. The casting was deliberate. Kubrick put a man who had briefly been a communist and who had broken before HUAC into the role of cinema's most iconic anti-communist madman. It was either cruel or brilliant, probably both. After the 48-take disaster on day one, Hayden went to a bar, came back, and found the character. The genius of his performance is that he plays a lunatic absolutely straight, no irony, no winking, opposite Peter Sellers' improvisations. The film grossed $9.16 million domestically and earned 4 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Number 8. Sterling Hayden kidnaps. His own children and sails to Tahiti. Hayden's first marriage to Madeline Carroll ended in 1946 after wartime separations made reconciliation impossible. His second marriage, to Pasadena dress designer Betty Ann DeNoon in 1947, produced 4 children, Christian and Dana, Gretchen, and Matthew, and a divorce in 1958 that became a brutal custody war. The schooner Wanderer was Hayden's vessel and his metaphor. Originally an 1893-built South Pacific trader, she was 95 feet long, roughly 100 tons, and the only thing in the world that made him feel free. He'd first bought her in 1946 for $7,000, sold her, then repurchased her on Christmas Day, 1955, for $20,000. On the night of January 18th, 1959, at 11 o'clock, Wanderer slipped out of Sausalito with Hayden's 4 children aboard. Ostensibly, they were bound for Santa Barbara on a $10,000 advance from Republic Pictures. Once past the 12-mile limit, Hayden assembled the crew and announced they were heading to Tahiti in direct defiance of a court order forbidding him to take the children to sea. It became a national sensation. And from Tahiti, he cabled reporters, "My motivation? An ounce of freedom is worth a ton of gold." The California courts called Wanderer old, rotten, and dangerous. Judge Harold Haley eventually ordered Hayden to repay nearly $50,000 to Republic Pictures. But to many Americans, Hayden became a folk hero, the man who told the bosses and the courts to shove it. Number 9, The Godfather, The Long Goodbye, and the role Sterling Hayden almost played in Jaws. 2 later roles cemented Hayden's place in cinema history. In The Godfather in 1972, his corrupt Captain McCluskey, savoring his veal seconds before Al Pacino's Michael Corleone shoots him dead, became one of cinema's most iconic death scenes. His towering 6'5" frame, looming over the young Pacino, added a physical menace that no other actor could have provided. Why, in The Long Goodbye, in 1973, Robert Altman cast him as Roger Wade, a blocked alcoholic novelist modeled on Hemingway and Chandler. Hayden was genuinely drunk and stoned on marijuana throughout filming. Altman was thrilled. He let Hayden ad-lib most of his dialogue. Hayden said it was the first role he ever made that he could actually stand to watch on screen. The first time he wasn't acutely mortified. Quote, "Roger Wade is so close to myself, a man who drinks because he's afraid of fear and failure," end quote. And then the tantalizing near miss. Hayden was reportedly offered the role of Quint in Jaws, the obsessed shark hunter that became one of cinema's greatest characters. But tax problems meant he would have been arrested upon re-entering the United States. The role went to Robert Shaw. Think about that. In Sterling Hayden, the real ship captain, the real war hero, the real man who'd spent his entire life at sea, was the natural choice for Quint, and he couldn't take it because the taxman was waiting at the dock. Number 10. Ashes scattered on San Francisco Bay. The sailor comes home. His third marriage, to Catherine Devine McConnell on March 9, 1960 in Sausalito, lasted until his death. They had 2 sons, Andrew and David. In total, Hayden fathered 6 children across 3 marriages. In the 1960s, he lived on the retired ferryboat Berkeley in Sausalito's bohemian waterfront, writing the autobiography that would outlast all his films. Wanderer, published by Alfred A. Knopf in 1963, was a critical triumph. The New York Post heard echoes of Poe and Melville to Steinbeck and Mailer, but the Los Angeles Times compared his sea writing to Conrad and London. It is now considered a classic of maritime literature. Its most famous passage, on choosing bankruptcy of purse over bankruptcy of life, on dreams of youth growing dim while caked in dust on the shelves of patience, is among the most widely quoted texts in sailing culture. In 1969, he bought a canal barge in the Netherlands, eventually mooring it in the heart of Paris. He called it the Who Knows. He split his time between the Paris barge, the family home in Wilton, Connecticut, and Sausalito. On the barge, he wrote his second book, Voyage, a 700-page epic about a voyage around Cape Horn that became a Book of the Month Club selection. He was, by his own admission, an alcoholic. He said simply, "I'm an alcoholic." He extolled marijuana alongside whiskey. He's looking back on his life, he said, "A lot of booze, sadness, a lot of tears, a lot of booze, but I had some marvelous times." His son Christian refused the Vietnam draft in 1969 and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Hayden supported him publicly, saying his son was opposing American occupation just as he himself had fought against German occupation of Yugoslavia. Hayden was diagnosed with prostate cancer and spent his final years working on a third book, an autobiography sequel to Wanderer, with a planned first chapter titled Down and Out on Sunshine Avenue. Shortly before the end, he spent a day sailing on Bluenose II, a replica of the racing schooner he'd competed against in 1938, a closing of a circle that began when a 22-year-old navigator found the windward mark in driving fog. He died on May 23, 1986, and at age 70, at his hillside home in Sausalito. His son-in-law George Ruckert said, "It was a quiet passing. He more or less went in his sleep." His remains were cremated and scattered at sea in San Francisco Bay. He never won an Oscar, never received a nomination. He was nominated for a BAFTA as Best Foreign Actor for Dr. Strangelove. His papers reside at Boston University. Sterling Hayden started at the top and worked his way down. His words, not mine. He called himself a commuter on a tinsel train. He said he'd been parlaying 9 years at sea into 2 decades of posturing. But the work endures. Dix Handley dying among Kentucky horses. General Ripper raving about precious bodily fluids. Captain McCluskey savoring his last meal. Roger Wade walking into the Pacific. And the words endure even more. He wrote, "Sooner or later, a man has simply got to do what he thinks is right, no matter what other people, or the courts, or his friends, or his enemies, or God himself may tell him. He was wrong about some things. He was a rat, as he said, and the people he named paid for his cowardice. But he was right about the sea. He was right about freedom. And he was right that an ounce of it is worth a ton of gold. When they scattered his ashes on San Francisco Bay, they gave back to the water the only part of Sterling Hayden that had ever been truly free." If this story surprised you, tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories like this one coming, and you don't want to miss them.